USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to the USCHO Weekend Review podcast for January 13th. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly, and this episode is brought to you by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo. Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. Jim, what a crazy weekend of hockey. And why don't we jump right in with the USCHO Game of the Week, which was the Saturday half of a two-game series at Minnesota Duluth. St. Cloud State came in. Brett Larson returns to where he was assistant coach for a couple of times, and it ends up being a split on the weekend. A good road win for St. Cloud State on Saturday.
It was, given the fact that they had lost that Friday night game, you're kind of licking your wounds a little bit. Then you fall behind 2-0 early in that Saturday night game, but then 4 goals to close things out. And that's just proving this team. When you're going to be a championship caliber team, you're going to have some of these character wins, and that's one of them. You come back, you battle back from a 2-goal deficit on the road in a hostile building. Looked like they had a great crowd both nights. That's a great win there for St. Cloud State. The odds are they're probably going to drop in the poll, but I don't think that they even care about the poll as much as they can care about just making sure that they kept a steady track going. That one loss didn't turn into 2 losses. And then you start to maybe hit a skid. I think that this would be one of those wins that at the end of the season, if they do something great, like reach a Frozen Four or even more so win a national championship, you look back on that game as one of those that could be a turning point.
Meanwhile, all the other home teams during the weekend in the NCHC swept Western Michigan, which has got a 10-game unbeaten streak going. Tough games. Miami gave them a good fight in both of those. North Dakota needed overtime twice with Colorado College. Denver, a 1-0 win and then an overtime win on Saturday over Omaha. That league is very tight right now.
Yeah, it is. And, I think that, teams that maybe weren't expected. I'm looking at you, Western Michigan, weren't expected to do a lot and didn't have the greatest start. Suddenly now relevant. The fact that they've pretty sure 9-0-1 in their last 10 games. That after start, they're 13-6-1 on the season. So you're talking about 4-6 to start, and now you're right there, ninth in the pairwise. They have climbed to, and that's a big step because that's a team that was, middle to bottom of the pairwise not too long ago. They have slowly crept up, and they have, these are big games. They're playing a lot of league games in that streak. That's a team that you've got to watch out for because everybody knows Denver. Everybody knows that you have to worry about Duluth. Everybody knows you have to worry about St. Cloud. But now you're throwing another team in there. And when you're talking league championships, home ice, to have another team in this mix makes it a lot more interesting.
And you look at Western Michigan, and they are getting some phenomenal goaltending from Trevor Gorsuch. .928 save percentage, just a smidgen over 2 goals against.
And that goes such a long way for most teams. Any team in Western, a team that they're not exactly exploding offensively. They've had a couple of good performances, a 4-goal game this week, out in Las Vegas when they won the Ice Vegas Invitational, a 5 and a 4-goal outburst. They had a 7-3 win over Niagara, 7-2 win over Omaha, but they've won a lot of these games, or they've been in a lot of these games where it's only been 2 goals or 1 goal, and they get a tie and a shootout win against Duluth right before the break in a 1-1 game. They've played some of these low-scoring games. So to have the goaltending be strong, that's going to give them a big push. If their offense isn't going, they know they can depend on the back end.
Looking at the Big Ten, Minnesota swept Notre Dame. Is this a turning of the corner for Bob Motzko's squad? Are they starting to prove that they are a potential team for the NCAA?
I'm kind of wondering, I mean, they're still on the outside looking in. I think they're 21 in the pairwise right now. They've got a little bit of ground to still make up. They're just above 500 overall, but that's a pretty good couple of wins to not just win. You do it on the road in a pretty, notably hostile Notre Dame arena, the Compton Family Ice Arena. And you do it pretty convincingly the first night, a 5-1 victory, a little tighter the second night, 2-1. But that's 3 in a row. They had beat Penn State. And, before the break, they were playing some decent hockey, had a lot of ties in there. They tied 3 in a row, but that put them as part of a 5-game unbeaten streak. So in the last 10 games, they've only got 2 losses. I'll take that. If you're trying to restore a little bit of faith in your team and maybe in your fan base as well, this is a team that at one point had lost 5 out of 6 games. So to start showing and start demonstrating to yourselves that you can be that team that goes out and wins games, that's a big positive.
Meanwhile, in the Big Ten, splits at Ohio State, Michigan winning on Friday, Ohio State recovering on Saturday. It is the opposite at Penn State, a 4-2 win for the Nittany Lions on Friday, and then Michigan State, a 6-4 win over the home squad on Saturday. And that has things all crunched up in the Big Ten standings as well.
Top to bottom, 10 points. And when you're talking 3 points for a win, that's basically three and a third games, that the last place Michigan State is out of first place. So yeah, it is, when you see these, for one thing, when you see a sweep, it really has a lot of power. Minnesota, of course, jumps up to second place, and they have 2 games in hand on first place Ohio State. But other teams are staying in it. Not getting swept can be a big part of it, but it's a jumbled standings right now, and there's still plenty of hockey left to play. But there's a lot of things that can play out here.
Well, let's take a look at some Hockey East results. First, some non-league action. UMass Lowell back into the top 20 in the pairwise. They were number 38 less than 2 weeks ago, sweeping at Colgate over the weekend. You got to see those games. Big wins for UMass Lowell over a Colgate team that started out slowly and has started to pick up some steam.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good Colgate team. I was impressed with their ability to get up and down the ice, good goaltending, very good goaltending. And they have, basically 4 forwards who are really pretty powerful and really good offense from their back end. Their defensemen shoot the puck very well. But Lowell had it this weekend, and that's 3 in a row. They beat UMass last Friday night. I think there's some believability, and I don't want to, try to get the gods of 2013 back, but you go back to Lowell's first and only Frozen Four appearance in 2013. They were 4-7-1 at one point in that season, and between then and the time they got to the Frozen Four, they only had 3 losses the rest of the way. I'm not saying this team has that type of talent, and they had some great goaltending in Connor Hellebuck in that team as well. Am I right? Yeah, they did have Hellebuck then. So I'm not saying that there's any way that this is, just definitely going to be an explosion for Lowell, but they've got themselves heading in the right direction. They're playing the right type of hockey. They're playing smart, disciplined hockey. And if they can find a way to start scoring some goals, they could be one of the more dangerous teams in Hockey East in the second half.
Meanwhile, 2 teams that got off to really abysmal starts are playing much better. Boston College beating Providence on Friday, BU doing the same to the Friars on Saturday. Providence could have ended the weekend 1 point out of first place. Instead, they're in 5th place behind both the teams that beat them.
Yeah, and that's just how tight the top is right now. And you're talking, 2 points separate first from 4th place. Northeastern, they ended up with a 2-game sweep of Maine. So now it's they who are really keeping up with Massachusetts. And, Boston College, they have a nice win against Providence on Friday. Then they get upset by New Hampshire on Saturday night. So we got to see which team is going to play the most consistent, this most solid hockey. Right now, it feels like it's UMass. They're 14-2 in their last 16 games. With St. Cloud losing, pretty good chance that they'll jump back into that number 1 spot. Now, that only lasted for a week the last time because they lost their first game out right after becoming number one. I think this time that their heads will be a little bit more level if they get back to that position. So I think that they're the best team. They're the most consistent team. I really had a high on Providence going into this weekend, but getting swept this weekend maybe has tempered my expectations. I know they have the talent. And then everybody else, Northeastern is another team that we don't talk enough about. They are a pretty scary team in that Hockey East standings, and at 14-4-1, they're right there, right in the middle of it. I believe 7 in the pairwise, maybe 8 in the pairwise right now. I think it is. So there's a lot more. I keep saying a lot more hockey to play. We're not really seeing a lot of defined breaks in Hockey East. Sometimes you have a top 2, and then you have the next 4, and then you have the next 5 or something like that. This year, you got maybe 6 teams that are right there and have a chance to be there at the end.
You mentioned Northeastern 3-2 and 4-0 wins at Maine over the weekend. They came into the week at number 12 in the USCHO.com men's Division I ice hockey poll. Wouldn't be surprised to see them up into the top 10, considering that 6 of the top 10 teams had at least a loss, some more than one over the weekend.
Yeah, it was kind of a crazy Friday because it was 5 of the top 10 teams lost on Friday all in one night. But we've seen it over the last couple of weekends. There's been a lot of inconsistencies among your top teams. It actually surprised me when I went to the unbeaten streaks page to see that there were so many teams that were actually having unbeaten streaks. A lot of them, though, did not start these unbeaten streaks anywhere near the top of the poll of their conference, and they've all started to creep up, pairwise too. They've all started to creep up, and now these teams all need to be on our radar.
We'll talk about teams with their streaks and their positions in just a moment. First, let's pause for a word from the NCAA Frozen Four. That's coming up April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
Speed and precision, unrelenting power. This trophy is not given, it must be earned. The 2019 NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
With a shot, saved by Morris. Takes the shot.
Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 and get your tickets today.
Continuing with USCHO's Weekend Review podcast, I'm Ed Trefzger along with Jim Connelly. There is another league that is a complete jumble, and that's Atlantic Hockey. And some results from the weekend have really crunched the standings. RIT came into the weekend in 7th place, now is in 4th place after a sweep at AIC, but only 2 points out of first. A nice sweep for Bentley over Robert Morris has them inching up the standings. But right now, the top 6 teams in the league, all within 3 points of each other.
And all 11 teams are within 10 points of one another. I know I mentioned 10 points at the Big Ten, but that's only 7 teams. This is 11 teams within 10 points of one another. So we've always talked, and you and I talk often on this show about it, that this is just one of those leagues that every year it feels like it comes down to the last game on the last night to decide so much. You see teams that, could have a first round bye and they end up on the road in the playoffs because they get swept the last week of the season. So it's, one of those situations that I've always looked at Atlantic Hockey as this difficult to predict, difficult to assume. The teams just don't seem to run away with that league too often, and even if they do, the races for all the rest of the playoff implications are always so tight, and it's going to be the same again. You can see it right now with a month and a half to play.
The other thing about the league is that as the programs have put more resources into recruiting, into scholarships, and into facilities, programs that were perennial bottom dwellers are no longer to be considered that way. And certainly what American International has done in the past 3 seasons under Eric Lang. And they are indeed an international team. I don't know. It was like 8 or 9 different countries represented, the most European players of any program. That recruiting channel has turned them from an also-ran into somebody competing for the league championship.
Yeah, AIC needed a lot. They needed a new coach, Gary Wright, great guy, one of my favorite guys that I've met in college hockey, but I think the game had passed him by a little bit. They needed a new building. They didn't get a new arena, but they got out of a really bad building into what is it called? The Mass Mutual Center out in Springfield. And that's a large AHL size building, but at least it's a lot better than the youth hockey rink that they used to play in. So they've taken some steps. Eric Lang, I think we knew had a chance to be a pretty darn good coach there, and he's shown it right away. And it's great to see that program succeeding. They will be part of our game of the week, not this weekend, next weekend when they travel out to Mercyhurst. So I'm very excited to see them play. I'll be heading out to Erie for that series. I'm very excited to see them play, and it should be a heck of a series given that those are the second and third place teams. Each of them second place teams. They're tied right now in the standings, and they're 1 point behind Air Force. So the first place team is very much within reach.
Both games, RIT early in the third period had 3-0 leads. AIC battled back to 3-2 and 4-3 on Friday and to 3-2 on Saturday. So they are an explosive late game team. So that should be a fun trip out there to Erie. Well, let's turn to the WCHA. Minnesota State with a weekend sweep and Bowling Green with a split. But still you have the top four teams within 7 points of each other in a league that gives 3 for a win.
Yeah, and Lake Superior State is one of those teams that's on one of the extended streaks right now. They are 8 games unbeaten, 7-0-1, and they're trying to creep up the standings in the WCHA. So you've got a lot of teams right there. I think everybody expected Minnesota State and Bowling Green to be there. Michigan Tech just seems to find a way to get there every year, but now you've got Lake State, Northern Michigan in that mix. And even I don't think Bemidji is going to make any type of a run for league championship, but they're definitely in that battle for home ice, and that should be really interesting. There is a big dip off though to those bottom 4 teams, and those 4 teams will compete basically for the final playoff spots, the final 2 playoff spots. That's Alaska, Anchorage, Alabama, Huntsville, and Ferris State.
We should also take a look at the lone independent team, and that's Arizona State. It's all at large for them in the NCAA bid. They may have made it a little bit more difficult, although they didn't drop as far as you might think after getting swept at Cornell this weekend. Yeah,
and that I thought it was going to be more detrimental when I saw the 2 losses. The thing that stuck out was a 6-1 loss on Friday night. Probably not their best performance of the year, but a 2-1 loss and a 6-1 loss all count the same in the pairwise. Right now, I think it's the need to refocus. If I'm going to look up their schedule, but if my memory serves me right, they are about to have a couple of weeks against Atlantic hockey opponents. No, I might be wrong about that. It might be they're playing Boston University next. They have this week is idle. That's what it is. That has screwed me up. Then 2 at Boston University. Then 4 straight games against Atlantic hockey opponents. There's no way that they can lose any more than 3 more games, in my opinion. I had said 7 was the safe number. 6 was a little bit, very, living dangerously, and 5. That's really living dangerously. If they can get 5 wins out of these final 8, it's pretty good. But they put themselves in a hole by getting into that final 10, knowing you need a good number of wins and losing the first 2.
They've been riding Joey Decord, 6 shutouts so far this season, and Johnny Walker scoring quite a bit. But if you can shut that team down, or if you can score, is there enough depth there? And do they need to worry not just about BU, but against those 2 Atlantic opponents?
They definitely have to worry about every single game remaining, and you're looking at their schedule getting more competitive. BU 4-0-1 in their last 5. Minnesota, we just mentioned, coming off a big week, and they've had 3 in a row. RIT is playing well, and AIC is kind of right there at the top of Atlantic hockey. So these aren't 8 cupcakes. There's no real cupcakes in there, but there also is a very low tolerance for losing at this point. They've got to be quite careful if there's going to be that what people are kind of calling that Cinderella run to the NCAA tournament. It's going to really depend on these 8 games here, and then hopefully you've put yourself in a position where you're 12 or 13 in the pairwise at worst, and then you can sit back and watch.
By the way, we should mention also before we move on to ECAC, Army and Air Force had a series at Air Force this weekend, both games ending in a 2-2 tie. Army came back from a 2-0 deficit Friday for what Frank Serratori, head coach at Air Force, called a bad tie. It was the other way, 1-0 and 2-1 leads for Army on Saturday. Air Force came back. Army really hurt right now by injuries, but one of the great matchups, and I had forgotten about this, but also heard mentioned they're going to do some renovations to that Cadet Ice Arena, new press area, new layout for fans in what's already a nice arena. Sellout crowds and standing room only both nights, 2,700 on Friday, 2,500 and change on Saturday, with one of the great rivalries in college hockey.
Well, it's good that the government shutdown does not affect Army and Air Force from playing, although I guess nobody's allowed to get a win in a shutdown. You just have to call it a tie. But yeah, I mean, that's a traditional rivalry, and being paired together in the same conference for a number of years now in Atlantic hockey has only developed it further, and you get great crowds. Those cadets love every minute of watching those two teams battle it out. It's always a battle on the ice, but then off the ice, it becomes more about friendship and camaraderie, something you have to respect.
Well, it's 6 wins in a row for Clarkson, including a game against St. Lawrence in December, and then winning the Desert Hockey Classic over Arizona State, Minnesota, Duluth, overtime win at Vermont, and then a pretty decisive 5-1 win over Union, 5-2 over Rensselaer over the weekend. Clarkson seems to really be on fire right now.
Yeah, they've caught it now, and this is a team we kind of believed would be able to catch a little bit of fire. I know they had some losses from last year's NCAA tournament team, but there is every bit as good a team as anybody in that league. Winning percentage wise, they're the same as first place Quinnipiac, but a lot of imbalance in how many games have been played by these schools in the ECAC. Cornell and Dartmouth and Yale all, have games in hand on especially on Quinnipiac. Quinnipiac must have a couple of bye weekends. I haven't looked at their schedule, but they must have a few bye weekends coming up here, or some non-league games left, because they just have already with the 12 games played. You've got teams like Cornell, Clarkson, and St. Lawrence, all with only 8 games played in league. So to have 4 games in hand is kind of an extreme number. So it really clouds the standings in the ECAC. If you look at winning percentage right now, it's Yale that has the best winning percentage. And when you look at Quinnipiac in first place, they'd actually be in third place if you rank it by winning percentage.
Well, and speaking of Quinnipiac, a 2-1 loss to Harvard at home for Quinnipiac. The Crimson sneaking back into the conversation in the ECAC. A
little bit. I mean, they're a 7-5-3 team, 4-4-2 in the conference, and that they've got a lot of talent. And their goaltender had a career performance on Saturday night. It was 46 saves or 47. It was a high number of saves. I remember looking at the box score. We talked about that being kind of a risky game for Quinnipiac, because it seems that Harvard loves to play them. I don't want to say they have their number in any way, shape, or form, because Quinnipiac has had their fair share of wins. But certainly that is one game that Harvard enjoys, seems to get up for, and always seems to put forward a very good effort.
Well, I think that probably covers just about everything over the weekend. What a crazy weekend of hockey, and things are going to be very tight. And the poll on Monday, I think I said 6 of the top 10 had a loss, 7 of the top 10 had a loss during the past week. So I know I've already filled out my ballot and sent it in. And I know it was hard, because when you have so many top 10 teams lose, you say, okay, how much should you move them down? Who should you bring up? Who should dump out of the poll? Who should come in? It is not an easy task to rank teams when you drop in your ballot. And that's why what comes out in the poll sometimes seems a little perplexing.
I have not done my ballot yet, and I haven't given it too much thought, but it will be one of the more difficult weeks. And it's funny because when you mentioned when that many teams produce a loss, especially top 10 teams produce a loss, I feel like there's less movement in the poll because nobody wants to bring a team from 11 and put them too high up and knock a team from 4 way down, something like that. So it's very difficult to really have much movement unless there's something dramatic like a 3-game loss or a team that's right there, around the top 10 or maybe just on the bubble of the poll goes and wins 3 in 1 week. That those things can shift. But I feel like this might be a poll where, aside from number 1 and number 2 changing, there might not be too many dramatic shifts.
I think you'll see a little bit of movement. I think you may see Denver creep up a place or two. Northeastern maybe back into the top 10. And this may be the week that UMass returns to number 1. That's just a hunch, but who knows? Yeah,
I think you're right on all those.
Well, Jim, that'll wrap it up for this edition of USCHO Weekend Review. We'll catch you next time. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.